Venezuela Decides 2024, as we welcome now journalist Fernando Casado to continue going over this election day and its relevance for the nation and also for the region. Hello, Fernando, can you hear us?
Yes, Ellen, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us in Venezuela Decides. And I would like to start by asking you, well, this election has brought maximum international media production and attention, and also a high level of disinformation that prevents a reliable perception of what is happening. And we are trying to uncover that, and we are trying to really analyze what is going on in Venezuela. Why do you think Venezuela generates this amount of tension, of concentration from the world view?
Well, I think that there are several aspects, no? Unfortunately, it is a routine in the narrative of the international media nowadays. The headlines that are continuously published are normally full of misinformation. And I think that one of the main reasons is that Venezuela was traditionally a Western country. It was part of what is called the Monroe Doctrine, or the backyard of the United States. And somehow it was a rebel country. It started to put in place policies against neoliberal policies that were hegemonic all over the region. This put in a very uncomfortable place, normally and historically, the main supplier or one of the main suppliers of oil of the USA. And then in that sense, the Bolivarian Revolution became an obstacle within the region for the hegemonic plans and agenda of the United States and the Western countries. That's why I think that Venezuela was, in a way, from their perspective, an enemy that had to be beaten. And that's why since the last 24 years already, it has created so many headlines continuously and so negative. Because in a way, at the same time, Venezuela has been the first country that belonged in the first years of the 21st century to a wave of progressive countries that put at stake really these hegemonic policies in the region. And in a way, it was very important, or it has been very important, the demonization, the continuous demonization of Venezuela in order to create a distorted image of this country, and in that sense, try to prevent Venezuela or the Venezuelan model adapted to different countries from expanding. I think that that's the main reason, or one of the main reasons why there is such a bad propaganda continuously about Venezuela. And of course, in order to legitimize the sanctions against Venezuela, there has to be a reason, no? These illegal unilateral sanctions have to be funded somewhere. And since these sanctions are not funded in international law, you have to create an image that is not a democratic country, and therefore there is a reason for Western countries in the name of freedom to impose those sanctions. So I would say that that's the reason why we have this bombardment, this propaganda bombardment continuously about Venezuela. There has to be, of course, a construction of a distorted image to also fund and somehow justify the harassment, the international harassment from the Western countries that Venezuela suffers continuously.
So, Fernando, you mentioned sanctions or illegal coercive measures, and I would like to stop there and really take our time. Of course, this is a key part of the debate. It has been part of the debate, of course, not only coming to this election day, but also throughout the years, the impact and the way that they affect not only the state, but also the Venezuelan people, the Venezuelan businesses. Could you tell us a little bit more about how these sanctions really work, how they operate, how they affect the population?
Oh yeah, of course. Venezuela has been part of the Western countries according to the rules of trade exchange, economic exchange, and this sanction has been extremely harsh towards especially the population and the most vulnerable parts of the population, because they have affected literally the main product of Venezuela, that has been the oil production. They have been able, these sanctions, for a while, in the beginning, in the toughest period of this sanction, probably between the year 2019, 2020, affected 99% of the production of the oil in Venezuela, creating a shortage of different products and a very economic crisis, a very deep crisis that affected mainly the most vulnerable people. So these sanctions that, as we have already mentioned, were completely illegal, were really bad for the people, and were based on just a political agenda that the Western countries had against Venezuela. After affecting the oil trade, they also affected different aspects of the economy of Venezuela. Also health, like Venezuela was unable for a long time to import different medicines. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a huge problem in Venezuela to get even vaccines from Western countries. It has to be through trying to get away from these sanctions to get different medical products from other places like Russia or China, because there was a real blockade of the Venezuelan economy. The same with the goods, food, industrial equipment and technological equipment. And that, again, there is not a legal argument to impose this blockade. It's just a political decision taken by Western countries that disagree with the Venezuelan democracy. Because what also makes Venezuela a very special regime is that in Venezuela, the liberal representative democracy rules are followed. And probably this is what creates the main discontent in the allies, in the Western allies against Venezuela, because in a way they play the same game they do, exactly the same one, but the candidates from the elite do not win the elections. It's probably one of the few countries, or maybe at the moment the only representative democracy where the candidates that do not belong to the elite win one after another elections and get a result towards a socialist society, but following the same rules they do. And here it seems that the elite and the external powers do not have the influence they do have in other liberal or so-called liberal democracies, which is also, as we know, also a very distorted way of imposing by the elites candidates and a way of domination. So I think that that's the main disagreement that also the Western countries have with Venezuela. That's why the harassment and the sanctions against Venezuela, because in a way it's a very negative precedent for other countries, as it already happened actually in places like, well, as we knew, in the first years of the second decade of the 21st century in Ecuador or Brazil or Argentina. And that's why afterwards, once they could change, flip by different means, the governments, sometimes by legislative coup d'etat, sometimes by elections, sometimes by treason, like happened in Ecuador, afterwards, in order to prevent from new progressive governments take power again, impose lawfare measures against the progressive candidates. So no way this is actually a very hypocritical way of acting by the Western countries led by the US.
Right, and you were speaking to the hypocrisy, and definitely there's something to it if we think that, for example, think tanks in the US are just now in the past days are already talking about and recommending the emissions of new U.S. sanctions in the face of a possible electoral outcome that does not respect what they seem should happen. So it begs the question, really, what is the democratic element of that type of interference? But I wanted to come back to one of the things that you mentioned. You said something regarding that, well, this propaganda bombardment had to do with also hindering the possibility of other countries following the Venezuelan model. And I'm thinking about the Venezuelan model of production and, of course, the way that Venezuela has been using its oil resources, but in a way to promote social welfare, to promote the well-being of its citizens as a model opposed to other ways of relating to natural resources. So in an election that apparently the mainstream media doesn't want to really compare different productive models between the opponents, what could you say about what is the government's relation to the oil production, what has been the Bolivarian relationship with oil, and what are the models that the opposition, the ultra-liberal opposition, is bringing to the table?
Well, we have seen it, no? We could now, during this process of sanctions, that the opposition agreed completely in the expropriation of Citgo, no? One of the main assets of Venezuela abroad, no? And at retail, maybe one of the main oil industries also in the US, no? With an estimation of $50 million price that has been simply stolen with other many assets along the Western countries. And the opposition has backed this decision, which is also, again, hindering the possibility of developing public policy in Venezuela, because that's probably, again, another of the main problems that Western allies and the US have against Venezuela, that they don't have a reliable partner, or a partner that in the oil industry is going to bring in this wealth to them without conditions. The royalties here in Venezuela were very high, not very, the benefit for the state, for the Venezuelan state, was very high in relation with the benefit of the private companies. And that's also something that worries the distant nationals that in a way are also backing these sanctions, backing the actions of the Western countries. So how Venezuela has dealt with their own resources was in a sovereign way, in the sense that we have been stolen this oil since we discovered it in our land almost a century ago. It's time for us to invest this wealth in public policies. It's time to share the wealth among the most vulnerable people. We had traditionally very high levels of poverty. This is a way to diminish poverty. And again, obviously, the capitalist model lives on the resources that come from third world, or what they consider the third world. That's why they cannot really allow the sovereignty of Venezuela to develop regarding the oil wealth, because that would mean that they will have less resources for their own development, and especially because their development is at the expense of the oil producers. So that's another of the reasons of this harassment against Venezuela, because normally also the U.S. transnational oil companies make great business and great benefits in these countries, and that was being renegotiated in Venezuela. But again, as we witness now a reorganization of multilateral powers that are emerging in different places. The U.S. Hegemonic power is absolutely at stake, not only at the economic level, but even at the military level, little by little. So that's probably will force the U.S. to rethink about the sanctions, especially in a global turmoil that we are experiencing at the moment. And hopefully the Barbados Agreement are going to be fulfilled, and these sanctions will be lifted little by little. So Venezuela will go to a second phase after resisting the harassment of the Western countries. Now it's time to rebuild all the social policies that were also affected by these sanctions and started as they used to do in absolute peace and with no sanctions, or at least if the Western countries do not want to be the allies of Venezuela, but at least stop imposing illegal sanctions, and then go into a second phase in Venezuela now after these years of sanctions, where they will rebuild all the public policies they used to have and that were really, really impacting in a very positive way the life of most of the people, and that in a way they were a reference model in many other societies, not only in the region but in many other places around the globe. So hopefully this will be the positive scenario that opens up, because in a way also the Western allies cannot hold these sanctions forever. I think that they will also benefit enormously from lifting those sanctions, and there is no logic in continuous imposing them.
So I was thinking, besides of course boosting national production, one of the ways that Venezuela has tried to sort out these impositions and these hardships brought about by the sanctions or the unilateral coercive measures has been its relations with other global South powers, like it's the case with China, for example, also with Russia, with other countries. So how does that relations, that new role of Venezuela in the international sphere comes to play into all of this, and how do you see it playing along for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think that the geopolitical position of Venezuela is really, really important at the moment, and for the US, but for many other global powers. No? I think that also in that dispute that at the moment is going on, Venezuela, again, because of their oil reserve, but also the minerals, and also the position, the geographic position in the Caribbean, so close to the US, is of a great importance. And I think that the Western countries and the US has realized that the sanctions have not worked. Probably after the result of the presidential election today in Venezuela, we are going to see a renewal of the political opposition politicians in Venezuela. Hopefully the ultra-radical rightish actors will step down and give place to other new actors that hopefully are going to follow a more democratic path in order to generate a political opposition in Venezuela. Therefore, there won't be any justification for the sanctions, and at the same time, hopefully, we'll see a Venezuela that will play a very important role, as they do right now, in the BRICS, in the relationships between China and its allies, and also Russia and its allies. And then in this world where the US is playing a very important role, of course, it's so close to Latin America at the same time. But these multiple relationships will also make Venezuela to have a very I would say positive position in order to benefit from creating relationships with each of these powers in an egalitarian relationship. The problem is that right now the Western allies are trying to suffocate in Venezuela, and it's not they are not succeeding in it. So hopefully the relationships will change, the global relationships are going to, in a way, show that Venezuela must, the sanctions must be lifted, and in that sense it will benefit enormously Venezuela and its population.
Fernando, before we finish, I would like to ask you, we are on the day of an important election process. Of course, we have still hours to go before we have the results, which will be given by the electoral authorities and the electoral authorities alone. But of course, you were speaking before about this propaganda bombardment coming from all over the world. What do you think is the role of alternative media, global South media, global South militants in this media battle that is going on regarding the narratives about what is happening today in Venezuela and what needs to happen tomorrow and the week after that?
I think that the alternative media at the moment has a fundamental role, and actually its position is very solid at the moment. If we look at how the credibility of traditional media is going down, and how also information can be created in alternative means like social media, digital media. It's very important because it's the only alternative that the international public opinion has in order to get a plural information, solid information, a different point of view in the information in the globosfera, in media in general. So since traditional media has played, mass media has played a fundamental political role in order to create this common sense according to the view of liberal perspective and the leaders of the Western Union that want to shock Venezuela. I think that the alternative media in that sense, it's really important in order to be able to generate new narratives where people can get an information that otherwise would be absolutely impossible to get. But because if there is an economic blockade against Venezuela, there is also an informative blockade against Venezuela. And if you try to look at mass media from all over the Western countries, is something unbelievable. They have exactly the same narrative. They are already talking about fraud. They have as their main and almost only sources of information the political opposition actors, and therefore they build up a reality that only fulfills the points of view of those who are against the government, and but the reality is much more wide. The reality is much more plural. So in that sense, the only window at the moment we have public opinion outside Venezuela has to get an information based on different point of view is this digital media. So I think that thanks to this digital media, many people can get a different narrative of what is going on in Venezuela that fits better with the reality of what is happening in Venezuela.
That is clear. So, Fernando, we are going to a short break now, but please stay with us. We will continue talking over this important day in Venezuela with you as we come back, and stay tuned with Venezuela Decides. Welcome back to Venezuela Decides as we continue to analyze all the highlights and also all the key things that we need to keep in mind as we go over this election day in Venezuela that has captured the eyes of the region, of the world, of course of the nation. And we were speaking to Fernando Casado, who's at our studios in Caracas. He was accompanying us as we go over the highlights of this election. So, Fernando, thank you for staying with us. And I would like to ask you, we were talking before about Venezuela's position, geopolitical position around the world, and the contacts that it had done with major powers to go over these unilateral measures that have really hindered the last years of the Venezuela the development.
I would like to ask you about its position in the region, specifically its relation to the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We are in the 70th anniversary of Chavez, and he really played a key role of putting Venezuela at the forefront of a united region of the Mercosur, of the ALBA, and that played a key role in doing all these years. What is your vision of how Venezuela stands today and the relations with Latin American and Caribbean, specifically Latin America, that is in a completely different political scene right now?
Yeah, no doubt that Venezuela was at the forefront of the regional integration. I think that organizations like ALBA or UNASUR were very important for this goal. And I think that the sanctions and also the reverse wave of rightish governments in the region also jeopardize somehow this process of integration that has been deepened for the first time after 200 years of Republican history. So I think that Venezuela, it's a fundamental country for the integration, and I think that once that this situation that Venezuela is living right now is overcome, I mean, once the sanctions start being lifted, or also when if the economic positive situation continues for the next months and years, I think that Venezuela again will play that fundamental role that has been lost in the second generation of progressive countries in the region. I think that in the second, the third decade of this century, we have seen again the rise of progressive governments all over the region, but it seems that they don't have the same strength regarding regional integration. So I would say that once that Venezuela plays again a very important role in the region without these sanctions, and its energy can be focused towards projects regional-wise, we will see again a rebirth of these projects that were left, especially UNASUR, that has been dismantled in the last year. And perhaps also ALBA has lost important countries like Ecuador. Ecuador will have again elections next year after the last three disastrous government. Hopefully the left will have again a chance. The headquarters of UNASUR are in Quito, in the capital of Ecuador. So hopefully we'll see a rebirth of this regional integration that is so important now that also at the global sphere the regional blocs are really important in order to play a role at global geopolitics.
So finally, to sum up, Fernando, I would like to ask you, we've been talking about the reality of what we need to keep in mind to understand this political moment in Venezuela, the importance of election day today. We've also been talking about the media bombardment, the propaganda bombardment that has been marking all this process, which sometimes makes it very difficult from abroad to really get a perspective of what is happening in the South American country. So I would like to ask you to sum up, what message would you give to someone from abroad, someone who's not in Venezuela, not in Latin America also? What do they need to keep in mind to understand what is happening in Venezuela today, the importance of this election, and moving on and looking to what comes ahead?
I think that the international community has to understand a key point today. The elections and the results cannot be modified, distorted, manipulated. So therefore, the results that we will see in a few moments, perhaps in the next hour or so, are the results that the population expressed today in a free democratic country as Venezuela is. And in that sense, it's really unfair and is out of question in a historic moment where we want to respect human rights, to keep sanctions against a democracy as Venezuela is. I would say then that the international community shouldn't left themselves to be manipulated by this propaganda, and accept that at the moment, which are the Western countries, the countries that are violating human rights, imposing those nonsense sanctions. So this result has to be respected by the opposition, first of all, or by the government if they lose tonight. But at the same time, the international community has to respect the result, even if these Western countries do not like this result. No? They have to overcome the period of sanction, of making up governments, like it happens with the fantasy president of Juan Guaido, etc., etc., and leave Venezuela alone to develop their own policies as the population has decided today.
Thank you, Fernando, for joining us in Venezuela Decides. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.